Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW's Spring Stampede 1994. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is Johnny B. Bad versus Diamond Dallas Page. Although this was a good match to start Spring Stampede 1994, back and forth matchup between Johnny B. Bad and DDP, with Johnny B. Bad keeping the pace of the match. Johnny hits a head scissors on DDP in the middle of the ring, and then Johnny B. Bad ultimately hits his signature sunset flip into a roll-up on Diamond Dallas Page, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Johnny B. Bad. Hats off to Johnny B. Bad for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Brian Pillman versus Steven Regal for Regal's WCW Television Championship. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Pillman and Regal, with Pillman keeping the pace of the match. Regal applies an STF on Pillman, but the hold is broke. Regal then lands European uppercuts on Pillman. It looked absolutely brutal. Pillman then counters and hits an enziguri on Regal, but this match ultimately ends in a time limit draw, and Regal retains at that time the WCW Television Championship. Hats off to Regal in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW Tag Team Championships in a Falls Count Anywhere matchup. It is the Nasty Boys versus Max Payne and Cactus Jack. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between the Nasty Boys and Max Payne and Cactus Jack, with Jerry Sags hitting Max Payne with a devastating chair shot. Brian Knobbs then hits Payne with a trash can. Cactus Jack then hits Sags with a chair shot. Payne then sends Knobbs into a table. Knobbs then hits Cactus Jack with a shovel. Sags then throws Cactus Jack off the ramp. Jack lands back first off the ramp. It looked absolutely brutal. Jerry Sags then goes for the cover, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Nasty Boys. Hats off to the Nasty Boys for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. It is the Great Muta versus Stunning Steve Austin. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between the Great Muta and Austin, with Muta keeping the pace of the match. Colonel Parker attacks Muta ringside. Austin then hits a knee drop on Muta. Austin then hits a springboard diving forearm on Muta and off the top rope. Muta then hits a stun gun on Austin. Muta then hits a handspring back elbow on Austin in the corner. Muta then hits a Hurricane Rana off the top rope on Austin. And then Muta sends Austin over the ropes. Referee ends up seeing this, and your winner of the match by disqualification, and still at that time WCW United States Heavyweight Champion, is Stunning Steve Austin. Hats off to Steve Austin for getting the win in that match, and at that time retaining the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is for the WCW International Heavyweight Championship. It is Rick Rude versus Sting. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Rude and Sting, with Sting keeping the pace of the match. Sting then hits an elbow drop on Rude. Sting then hits a Stinger Splash on Rick Rude as well as the referee. Sting then applies a Scorpion Deathlock on Rude. Vader is here. Vader makes his way down to the ring. Sting then attacks Harley Race and Vader. Harley Race then goes to hit Sting with a chair but missed and hit Rude. Sting then goes for the cover, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time, new WCW International Champion, is Sting. Hats off to Sting for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a bunkhouse match. It is Dustin Rhodes versus Bunkhouse Buck. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Rhodes and Buck, with Rhodes keeping the pace of the match. Rhodes and Bunkhouse Buck both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Buck hitting Rhodes with a pair of brass knuckles, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Bunkhouse Buck. Hats off to Bunkhouse Buck for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Vader versus the Boss. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Vader and the Boss, with Vader keeping the pace of the match. Vader ultimately hits his signature moonsault off the top rope on the Boss, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is Vader. Hats off to Vader for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our main event of Spring Stampede 1994. It is Ric Flair defending the WCW Heavyweight Championship against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Flair and Steamboat, but Flair ultimately keeps the pace of the match and picks up the victory against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and retains the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. A couple of things I want to say about WCW Spring Stampede 1994, man, before I get out of here. Number one, this was a solid event. It really was. I mean, the opening match, Johnny B. Bad versus Diamond Dallas Page, it was a great match. And to be honest with you, Johnny B. Bad for WCW, I mean, a lot of people gravitated towards Johnny B. Bad. He was definitely a babyface in WCW, and the fans loved him. Diamond Dallas Page, I mean, seeing DDP in the ring against Johnny B. Bad, I mean, it was definitely, it was crazy to see, man, to be honest with you, for a numerous amount of reasons. Number one, a lot of people don't, a lot of people forget that DDP didn't start out as a professional wrestler. He started out as a manager. And one of the main guys that he did manage at the time was the Diamond Stud, a.k.a. Scott Hall. And eventually, he moved on from being a manager and started, wrestling himself, I think at the age of anywhere between 35 to 38 years old. So I believe it was 35. That's pretty old for, start your in-ring career at 35, where a lot of people start their in-ring career, 18, 19, 20 years old. So, for DDP to get his start in professional wrestling as a wrestler at the age of 35 is absolutely insane. Not only that, we get the debut, if you will, of Kimberly Page, which was at the time the wife of DDP. So it was great to see that dynamic in the, in the ring against Johnny B. Bad and seeing her ringside. Because she does play a crucial part in DDP's career throughout WCW. Brian Pillman versus Steven Regal for the television championship. Fantastic match, man. Brian Pillman, and I've stated this multiple times in the past as well, Brian Pillman was severely underrated in his career. The guy could have been multi-time world champion, in my honest opinion. There was a lot of things that Brian Pillman did in his in-ring career that, was way past his time. And he was, the high-flying stuff that Pillman was doing. It's kind of the same thing that Owen Hart was doing. A lot of the things that Owen Hart did as far as a moveset and being a high flyer, a lot of people didn't see that, especially in WWE or in WCW. So when Pillman came into the fold with WCW and, some of the high-flying moves that he was doing, not a lot of people in WCW at that time were doing those things. Maybe, besides maybe Too Cold Scorpio, who's also an absolute legend, a professional wrestler, and severely underrated. But this match between Pillman and Regal, man, it was severely underrated. It was a great match, and hats off to Regal, man. Even though this match ended in a time limit draw, Regal did a hell of a job defending that WCW Television Championship when he was holding the belt, man. He did a fantastic job and put on fantastic matches, man. So again, I wish we got a concrete winner in that match, but unfortunately the match ended in a time limit draw. The Nasty Boys versus Max Payne and Cactus Jack. I'm not going to sit here and say the Nasty Boys were a severely underrated tag team. I'm not going to sit here and say that. Were they a good tag team? Yes. But are they better than the likes of like the Steiner Brothers and Harlem Heat? Absolutely not. I would put Doom above Nasty Boys by a long shot. Nasty Boys, I feel like at the time they were a tag team to kind of slide in, as a mid-card tag team to have a match. And, fortunately enough for them, they held tag team championship gold. So, but I feel like the Nasty Boys were never main event caliber talent. Their best bet was mid-card at best. And to be honest with you, Max Payne and Cactus Jack, even though the Nasty Boys won, kind of gave the Nasty Boys a run for their money throughout that match until that crazy, spot in the match where Jerry Saggs throws Cactus Jack off this ramp and Cactus Jack lands back first, probably hits his head on the concrete floor, and he's completely knocked out. So it was easy for Jerry Saggs just to go over, get the cover, and get the pinfall. I mean, Cactus Jack's, fall off that ramp was absolutely brutal. And it was a really good match, man. The Nasty Boys ended up winning and retaining the WCW Tag Team Championships. The Great Muta versus Austin for the WCW United States Heavyweight Championship. Fantastic match. Great Muta is an absolute legend. Big fan of the Great Muta growing up, man. Absolute legend. And this match did not disappoint, man. But unfortunately, Muta ended up throwing Austin over the ropes, which at the time causes a disqualification in WCW, and Austin ended up retaining the championship due to disqualification. Rick Rude versus Sting. Fantastic match. The one thing I will say about this, too, is I don't think Rick Rude holding the WCW International Heavyweight Championship was actually recognized by WCW, if I'm not mistaken. And to be honest with you, it's kind of funny because I personally, watching WCW, when I was a kid, I thought the WCW Championship was trash. I hated the way it looked. It really looked like a mid-card title, in my honest opinion. And when you look at the WCW International Championship, it's the all-gold NWA Championship. I mean, not the 10 pounds of gold, but it was the all-gold heavyweight championship. And I don't know why, what was the, dispute between having that gold belt just as the WCW Championship rather than that silver and blue one that I thought was just god-awful, man. I don't know who came up with that, but it was an awful idea. To me, growing up watching professional wrestling, that all-gold championship was synonymous in professional wrestling. Ric Flair holding that championship, Harley Race holding that championship. I mean, that championship is synonymous, and as well as the 10 pounds of gold. And, what NWA is even doing now. I mean, that championship is still, it might not be more predominantly known than what it was in like the 70s and 80s, but it's still the 10 pounds of gold. And when I looked at this matchup and saw, the difference between Flair holding the WCW Championship and, Sting beating Rude for the International World Championship, I don't understand what the whole issue was and why that all-gold World Championship just wasn't WCW's World Championship, at the time. It wasn't like their World Championship until I think a couple of years later, or a year or two later. So I didn't really understand that. I don't know if Rick Rude actually got acknowledgement for holding that championship as the real world champion. That's a humongous toss-up, but Sting ended up picking up the victory in this match, and at that time becoming the new WCW International Heavyweight Champion. Vader versus Boss. It was a decent match. I mean, I was never a big fan of the Boss Man, or the Boss, if you will. Vader, absolute legend. And honestly, the way that they slotted this match in as the co-main event, this was just, pretty much what happened in the last pay-per-view is the reason why Vader and Boss had a match, because Vader was wrestling Flair in the Thunderdome match. And, Vader and the Boss kind of had a little bit of a spat in that match where Harley Race got involved and Vader attacked the Boss, so on and so forth. That's why we had this match for the following pay-per-view at Spring Stampede of that same year. So it was a solid match, and Vader ended up picking the victory, getting the victory against the Boss by hitting that devastating moonsault on the Boss Man, which is absolutely insane to see a guy that's, the size of Vader hitting that moonsault, man. It's absolutely legendary, and hats off to Vader, man. A guy that's walking around 400 pounds that can wrestle as a light heavyweight and probably give you a 60-man Iron Man match with not a problem at all. So, hats off to Vader for getting the win over the Boss. And obviously the main event, two of the biggest rivals in WCW, even early NWA days, Ric Flair versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. It was a great match, man. There's not a night that you can't see Ric Flair versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and be disappointed. Steamboat, Flair have had great matches throughout both of their careers, synonymous matches, especially Chi-Town Rumble. Their Iron Man matches is absolutely phenomenal stuff, man. Two legendary careers. And Ric Flair ended up getting the victory in this match and retained the WCW World Championship. But just like I do with every single one of these WCW pay-per-views, or any pay-per-views for that matter, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of 10. And honestly, I'm going to have to give Spring Stampede 1994 a solid rating of a 5.5, if not 6. I thought this was a really decent event from top to bottom. And honestly, I mean, there wasn't really a match on here that really disappointed. So I'm going to have to give WCW Spring Stampede 1994 a solid 6, if not 6.5 at best. But this is my review of WCW Spring Stampede 1994. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.